The barracks showers echoed with the usual mix of routine chatter and end-of-day exhaustion. A place where rank didn't matter as much as soap, steam, and getting the grime of training off your skin. Recruits moved in and out, some complaining, some laughing, all trying to survive the relentless pace set by the instructors. But in the middle of all this, one figure stood out. Not because anyone recognized her, but because she carried herself differently. Quiet, precise, a stillness that didn't match the chaos around her. Her name, at least the one on record, was Taylor, and as far as anyone knew, she was just another new recruit, just another face standing in line, another body adjusting to the cold reality of military training. Nobody suspected the truth behind those calm eyes or the elite discipline she kept tightly locked beneath the surface. And that was exactly how she wanted it. Tonight, she was assigned to the last shower rotation. The rest of her squad had already rushed through, eager for sleep. She didn't mind being last. She preferred the quiet. She moved with a measured confidence, folding her towel neatly, securing her gear in a perfect line. Anyone watching would think she was simply meticulous. They wouldn't suspect that she had spent years in some of the most demanding environments on the planet, completing missions that didn't officially exist. She stepped into the shower bay just as Sergeant Rylan entered behind her. He was known across the base for being hard, sarcastic, and, when he believed no officers were watching, a little too heavy-handed with recruits. In his mind, yelling louder meant teaching better, and pushing boundaries meant uncovering weakness. Most recruits feared him, some hated him, but almost none challenged him. Except today, he encountered someone he really shouldn't have tried to test. He saw Taylor standing quietly with the water running, and something about her calmness irritated him. There was no nervous fidgeting, no jumpiness, no reaction to his presence. He mistook her steadiness for arrogance. He mistook her silence for defiance. And in his world, defiance was an invitation. Without warning, he grabbed the shower head from above and swung it, blasting her with a sudden rush of ice-cold water, soaking her from head to toe. A few recruits still lingering near the doorway turned their heads, half curious, half afraid. Rylan smirked, expecting the usual startled reaction, fear, a flinch, maybe a stammered apology for something she hadn't actually done. But Taylor didn't yelp. She didn't jump. She didn't even blink. She simply stood there, letting the water cascade over her as if nothing had changed. Her breathing stayed slow. Her posture stayed steady. And her eyes, those calm, unreadable eyes, shifted toward the sergeant with a patience that unsettled him far more than any anger could have. Rylan narrowed his eyes, bothered by how unimpressed she looked. "Well," he barked, "you deaf? You blind? You gonna move or you just gonna stand there like a statue?" Still, she didn't give him the reaction he wanted. Instead, she slowly reached up, turned off the water, and faced him fully. She didn't get in his space. She didn't raise her voice. She just held her ground with a quiet confidence that he couldn't understand. In that moment, something unexpected flickered through the sergeant's chest, an instinct he rarely felt. Not fear, not respect, just a strange, foreign uncertainty. As if suddenly he had stumbled into a situation he didn't quite control. A few recruits whispered at the edge of the room, unable to look away. They sensed something shifting, an unseen line being crossed. Everyone expected Taylor to break, or at least react, but the stillness around her only amplified the tension. Rylan stepped closer, challenging her. "You got something to say, recruit?" She met his stare the same way she might look at a threat she had already measured, calculated, and dismissed. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. "No, Sergeant," she said simply. "Nothing to say." But underneath that steady tone, there was something else, something the sergeant couldn't recognize and something he never should have provoked. Because what he didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that Taylor wasn't just another recruit. She wasn't there to learn discipline. She was there to observe, evaluate, blend in, and above all, remain invisible. She was deep cover Navy SEAL, one of the few women to complete the pipeline. And pushing her, testing her, was a mistake no instructor wanted to make. The sergeant, still unaware of what he had awakened, leaned closer. "Good," he muttered, "because you're going to learn your place." But as he turned away shaking his head, Taylor's expression finally shifted. Not in anger, not in fear, but in a way that suggested she wasn't the one who needed to be taught anything tonight. She already knew exactly how to handle someone like him. And soon, the sergeant would learn exactly who he had just soaked. The moment the cold splash hit her, the entire room froze. Water dripped down her uniform, soaking into the fabric and running onto the concrete floor. The other trainees, who had been laughing a second earlier, suddenly fell silent. Every one of them knew the sergeant's temper, but none of them had seen him push someone this far. They expected her to yell, to break, to lose control like so many others did under his command. But she didn't. She just stood there, letting the water drip from her fingertips, as calm as if she had just stepped out of a quiet rainstorm, rather than being humiliated in front of 60 recruits. The sergeant expected fear. He expected outrage. He expected weakness. What he didn't expect was her eyes. They didn't show anger. They showed calculation. A quiet, patient kind of focus that made the sergeant's grin falter for a split second. She didn't speak. She didn't flinch. She merely looked at him, and that was enough to make the entire platoon hold their breath. The sergeant tried to recover his confidence, pacing in front of her like a wolf theatrically sizing up prey. He puffed out his chest, stepped closer, and barked, "Didn't hear me the first time, recruit? I said take a shower." His words echoed across the steel walls of the training bay. But she didn't respond. Her silence was louder than any shout. The recruits watched her carefully. Some felt sorry for her. Others waited for the explosion they were sure would follow. One of them whispered, "This guy's done it now." Another shook his head and muttered, "She's gonna break. Everyone breaks with him." But she didn't break. She just inhaled once, deep and slow, the kind of breath that came from someone who had seen pressure far worse than this. Someone who had been trained to survive where most people couldn't. Someone who didn't just know discipline, she embodied it. The sergeant stepped even closer, close enough that his breath hit her cheek. He wanted a reaction, any reaction. Instead, she gave him the unemotional stillness of someone who had lived through moments far darker than a drill instructor's theatrics. It unnerved him, though he tried hard not to show it. Finally, with the same steady tone as before, she said quietly, "Is that all, Sergeant?" A few recruits almost gasped. No one had ever asked him something like that. He blinked, taken off guard. "What did you say?" She wiped a single drop of water from her chin, letting it fall to the floor. "Just want to know if you're finished wasting my time." The room went dead still. Everything inside the sergeant's expressions shifted. His smile evaporated, his eyes narrowed, and he looked, for the first time, unsure. But instead of snapping or exploding, he let out a small laugh, a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "You think you're tough, don't you? You think that because you got soaked, you can stand here and talk back?" "I don't think anything," she said quietly. "I just know I didn't come here to play games." The way she spoke didn't carry arrogance. It carried truth. Truth supported by something the recruits didn't yet understand. Something she had never told them. Something the sergeant had no clue he had just stepped into. The sergeant leaned in again. "Oh, we'll see about that. Since you like water so much." He snapped his fingers. Two assistant instructors wheeled out a massive steel container. It was a cold water immersion tub used for shock conditioning, something usually introduced weeks later in training. Recruits murmured nervously. Everyone knew the tub was brutal. Ice-cold water, timed submersions, breath-controlled drills, hardcore training designed to crack even seasoned fighters. The sergeant motioned toward it. "Get in." The room erupted into low murmurs. Even the toughest recruits flinched. That tub wasn't a punishment. It was a challenge meant for the strongest candidates. The sergeant wasn't just trying to humiliate her. He was trying to break her completely. She didn't hesitate. She didn't argue. She didn't even blink. She walked toward the tub with quiet footsteps, water still dripping from her sleeves. The sergeant followed behind with a smug grin returning to his face, certain he finally had her cornered. But as she approached the edge, she paused and looked down at the swirling, icy water. Her reflection shimmered on the surface, steady, unshaken, unreadable. Then she stepped in. The shock should have made her gasp. The cold should have made her flinch. But she sank into it calmly, lowering herself until only her head remained above the surface. The recruits stared with wide eyes. One whispered, "Is she even human?" Another breathed, "I couldn't last 10 seconds in there." But she had done this before, many times. In darker water, under harsher pressure, with far more than her pride on the line. Water was not her enemy, it was her element. The sergeant began pacing again. "Let's see how long you last. The record is 2 minutes. I don't think you'll beat it." She said nothing. 30 seconds passed, then a minute 30. She didn't tremble, she didn't tense. She kept her breathing slow, controlled, deliberate, the kind of breath taught only in elite programs. The sergeant clenched his jaw. Recruits looked at him with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Some began whispering, "Who is she?" Others stared in silence, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. 2 minutes passed, then 2:30, then 3. The sergeant's smile vanished completely. For the first time, he realized he had underestimated someone badly. She looked up at him, still calm. "Time, Sergeant?" He checked his timer. 3 minutes, 40 seconds. She nodded, lowered herself deeper, and said, "Start it again." The room erupted. Even the assistant instructors stared in shock. The sergeant opened his mouth to speak, but she was already lowering her face into the water. Before he could regain control, an officer standing at the far door stepped forward quietly. Someone who had been watching the entire thing without announcing himself. Someone who knew exactly who she really was. Someone the sergeant wished he had noticed sooner. And as she remained submerged, motionless, perfectly controlled, the officer shook his head slowly and whispered, "He has no idea what he's dealing with." The hallway outside the barracks fell silent after the sergeant slammed the door behind him, but inside, the weight of what just happened settled like a fog. Recruits whispered to each other, stealing glances at her, some shocked, some nervous, some simply confused. Nobody knew what to say. They had never seen a recruit move like that, react like that, or take a hit like that without even flinching. But she didn't say a word. She walked calmly to her bunk, wiped the water dripping down her neck, and began refolding the uniform that had been tossed to the floor. Every crease was sharp. Every movement was quiet. The room felt like it was holding its breath. A recruit across from her finally whispered, What was that? How'd you grab his hand like that?" She didn't look up. "Just reacted," she said softly, the closest thing to an explanation anyone would get. They stared at her with a mixture of respect and fear, but she didn't feed it. Instead, she finished folding her uniform, sat down, and started handling her gear as if nothing had happened. She wasn't playing tough. She was conserving energy, something every SEAL learned early. Respond only when needed, never more than necessary. The sergeant, however, was not done. Outside, he stalked down the hallway, soaked, humiliated, and furious. He couldn't understand what had gone wrong. He replayed it in his mind again and again, his hand grabbing her shoulder, his dominance over the room, the standard shock treatment every recruit had to endure. But she hadn't broken. She hadn't even been startled. She had reacted with precision, like a trained professional. No, not like a recruit, like someone with experience. He began asking around the other drill staff. Anyone know her record, last name, where she transferred from? Nobody had information beyond the basics. Her file was thin, suspiciously thin, bare bones, age, birthplace, emergency contact. Everything else was stamped with the kind of redactions normally reserved for intelligence personnel. The sergeant clenched his jaw. He felt something he hadn't felt in years: unease. Back in the barracks, she moved with quiet efficiency, checking her bag, her boots, the seams in her uniform. Others watched her, unsure whether they should speak or stay silent. But then the intercom buzzed. "Recruit dorm inspection in 5 minutes." Groans rippled across the room. Everyone scrambled. Everyone except her. She was already done. When the drill team entered, 3 instructors stormed across the room with clipboards and flashlights. They tore open lockers, checked corners for dust, flipped blankets, and barked at recruits for the smallest mistakes. The lead instructor stopped at her bunk. He looked at the hospital corners of her bed, flawless. He lifted her folded shirts, every line straight, every edge identical. He checked her boots, polished to a mirror shine, the kind only someone with years of service could achieve. It wasn't normal, not for a recruit. He didn't say anything. He just stared at her for a moment, squinting, as if trying to recognize her. She met his gaze with calm, steady eyes. He moved on. Across the room, the sergeant appeared again. His uniform was dry, but his temper wasn't. He walked slowly between the rows of recruits until he reached her bunk, arms crossed tightly. "You." She stood. "Name." She answered calmly. "Step outside." The recruits watched with wide eyes as she walked past him, her posture straight, calm, unshaken. When the door closed behind them, the hallway felt colder. He kept his voice low, but his anger was sharp. "You don't touch a drill instructor, ever. I don't care who you think you are." She held her hands behind her, standing at attention. "You startled me, Sergeant. Reaction was automatic." "Automatic?" he said with a harsh laugh. "You took my wrist like you've done it 1,000 times." She didn't reply. "Where'd you learn that?" he pressed. "Self-defense classes, Sergeant." It was the first lie she'd told since arriving. He didn't believe it. "You're hiding something." She didn't respond. Navy SEALs were trained to maintain a steady heartbeat, even when confronted. Her eyes didn't flicker. Her breathing didn't change. Her pulse didn't rise. She didn't break. The sergeant stepped closer. "I don't know what your angle is, but you're not going to intimidate me." She didn't speak. "And whatever little trick you pulled earlier, don't ever try that again." "I won't, Sergeant." Her tone was respectful, her posture perfect, her self-control absolute. He stared at her for a long moment, trying to figure her out, but he couldn't, and that bothered him more than anything. So finally he snapped, "Get back inside." She obeyed and returned to her bunk. The room went silent the moment she stepped in. She didn't make eye contact with anyone. She sat down and laced her boots, each movement methodical. When the drills dismissed the recruits for chow, everyone filed out, chattering nervously about her. Some asked if she had martial arts training. Some thought she had prior service. Some thought she was special ops. She walked alone. In the dining hall, she sat in the corner, eating quietly. The sergeant watched her from across the room. Others noticed the tension, but nobody understood the situation. Not yet. But then something happened that changed everything. Just as the recruits were leaving the chow hall, an emergency alarm rang through the base, sharp, sudden, unmistakable. Recruits froze. Instructors snapped into action. Officers rushed across the courtyard. A simulation drill? No, this alarm was different, more serious. Recruits were ordered to assemble immediately. Drill instructors ran through lists, shouting names, directing units. Everyone was scrambling, confused, overwhelmed. Except her. She immediately scanned her surroundings, checking exits, personnel, movement patterns. Her brain switched into a different mode, the mode she'd trained for years. She walked towards the assembly point before anyone else reacted. Her posture changed subtly. Her shoulders squared, her steps precise. She moved like someone who had done this hundreds of times. The sergeant noticed. He muttered under his breath, "There it is again." While others panicked, she remained calm, collected, focused, too focused. And when the commanding officer arrived, scanning the crowd, his eyes locked on her, instantly, as if recognizing something he wasn't supposed to see. He walked straight towards her. The sergeant watched, confused and uneasy. The commanding officer stopped a few inches away from her and lowered his voice so only she could hear. "What are you doing here?" She slowly exhaled. "Just following orders, sir." He studied her silently. And then he said the last thing the sergeant ever expected to hear. "You were supposed to stay off the radar." Everything froze. Everything changed. And the sergeant finally realized, whatever she was hiding, it was bigger than he ever imagined. Rain hammered the metal roof of the training hut as the night deepened, but inside the air was heavy with tension. The recruits whispered in nervous clusters, replaying every second of what they had witnessed earlier. The moment when Maya, the quiet trainee everyone had overlooked, had stepped forward with a level of control and precision no ordinary recruit possessed. And of course, the sergeant who had tried to humiliate her had learned the hard way that she was far more than she seemed. Word spread instantly through the camp, and by the time the sun dipped behind the distant hills, the entire base felt different. The sergeant avoided the main training grounds entirely. Some said he'd gone to the infirmary to get his shoulder checked. Others whispered he was sitting alone in his quarters, trying to figure out who Maya really was. Maya, meanwhile, remained calm and focused. She spent the evening cleaning her gear, tightening straps, and preparing for whatever came next. To everyone else, she looked relaxed, maybe too relaxed for what she'd just been through. But inside, she was replaying every movement, every strike, every decision. She had gone full Navy SEAL only because the situation demanded it. She didn't regret it, but she hadn't expected the reaction that followed. Because as she cleaned her boots, she heard the distant sound of approaching footsteps. Heavy, purposeful. Not the steps of a recruit. Not the steps of the sergeant either. There was authority in that stride. Someone higher up. Someone who didn't waste time. Maya straightened. A tall officer appeared in the doorway, silhouetted by the dim glow of outside floodlights. The entire bunk went silent. The officer's uniform wasn't the usual training issue. His chest bore insignia that only appeared on operators with years of service. He scanned the room until his eyes landed on Maya. "You," he said calmly, "walk with me." Maya didn't hesitate. She rose, nodded, and followed him outside, where the night air was thick with humidity and the distant hum of generators. As they walked, the officer kept his gaze forward. "Your file is unusual, very little on paper, too little. No one comes through this program with evaluations like yours and no prior documentation." Maya didn't respond. She knew what he was doing, testing her composure, just like any operator would. "So," he continued, "you want to explain what happened with Sergeant Hallman." He didn't sound angry. If anything, he sounded curious. Maya walked with the same steady stride she always did. "He initiated contact after attempting to humiliate me in front of the class. I responded within protocol and maintained control. He chose escalation. I neutralized the threat." The officer stopped. He turned, studying her more closely now. "You neutralized him in under 7 seconds." Maya nodded. "Yes, sir." "That," he said, "is not normal." The two of them walked again until they reached a dimly lit operations shed at the far end of camp. Inside, the lights flickered on automatically, revealing a table covered with maps, training reports, and performance charts. He placed a folder on the table, her folder, thin as a whisper. He tapped it. "You're not here by accident, are you?" Before Maya could answer, another voice spoke from the shadows. "She's here because we requested her." Maya instantly recognized it. Commander Hale, the Navy SEAL officer who had once overseen covert evaluations for certain classified candidates. He stepped into the light with the same calm confidence she remembered from years back. The tall officer nodded respectfully. "You didn't tell me you had someone embedded in selection." "We needed to see if she still had it," Commander Hale replied. "And we needed to see how long she could keep her identity hidden." Maya stood silently. She had expected this moment eventually, but not this soon. Commander Hale turned to her. "You handled yourself well today. Better than I expected, actually. That sergeant didn't know who he was poking." Maya took a slow breath. "I didn't want to reveal anything, but he left me no choice." Hale nodded. "We saw the footage. Your reaction time was 15% faster than your last recorded evaluation. Your control was textbook. Even your breathing didn't spike until after the confrontation was over." Maya's eyes hardened slightly. "Is this about the assignment?" Hale exchanged a look with the officer before turning back to her. "It's about more than that. We've lost communication with one of our forward reconnaissance teams. They were operating in an area where we cannot send an official recovery squad." Maya didn't blink. She understood immediately. "Off the books." "Off the books," Hale confirmed. "We sent a request for our strongest candidate to be inserted into the nearest training cycle for evaluation, and that candidate was you." Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the metal roof in steady, violent rhythm. The officer folded his arms as he studied her posture, her calm expression, the way she weighed every word. "You're not just passing through selection," he said. "You're here because you might be the only operator capable of completing a recovery mission that no one else can even attempt." Maya exhaled slowly. "And the sergeant?" Hale shrugged. "He got in the way." The officer shook his head. "He's lucky he still has a career." Maya didn't respond. She didn't need to. She had endured worse, and she had stayed silent through far more dangerous challenges. That was the nature of covert operators, invisible until needed. Hale stepped closer and placed a sealed envelope on the table. Inside is the satellite image of the last known position of the missing team. "Your mission briefing begins at 0600 hours. You are to meet us at the airstrip before dawn. You will be traveling alone until rendezvous." Maya didn't open the envelope. She simply nodded once. Clear, precise. "Understood. You will have a 4-hour window to rest. Use it. The next 72 hours will test you harder than anything selection threw you at." He started to leave, but the officer raised a hand. "Before we release her, I have to ask." He turned to Maya. "Why conceal who you are?" Why come through the program acting like just another recruit? Maya met his eyes calmly. Because the strongest operator is the one no one notices. Power means nothing if it's obvious, and silence, she added, is the only armor that never fails. The officer blinked. He hadn't expected that answer. But Hale smiled knowingly. That's why she was selected, the commander said. She doesn't fight for recognition. She fights for results. With that, both men stepped aside. Maya exited the shed and walked into the stormy night. The rain soaked her instantly, but she didn't flinch. She walked with purpose, each step steady, controlled, unstoppable. The camp knew her now. The rumors would spread. The sergeant would talk. And by morning, everyone would know she wasn't someone to mess with. But none of that mattered to her. She didn't care what they thought. She didn't need validation. She never had. All she cared about was the mission ahead. Because the moment she opened that envelope, she would stop being a trainee and become exactly what she had been trained to be. A ghost in the dark. A weapon with a heartbeat. A Navy SEAL operator on a mission no one else could complete. And when dawn arrived, she would step into that role without hesitation, ready to crush whatever stood in her path.